Let's go back to trying to go beyond compliance and just talk a little bit about that. How can we take Teavaro, add it together with AWS and help customers comply with GDPR and go beyond that?
I think it all starts with the desire to innovate in the area that you work in as an organization. So if your purpose is to basically make information as usable online to your users as possible, it's clearly needed. You need to identify them, you need to know who they are, where are they in their journey, what kind of information you need to present to them, and that you do that in the described GDPR compliant way, and that you have the tools around it to analyze the data, to have the data ready as real time as required, and that you can bring data together from different systems. So one of the big challenges we're seeing is that because of the legacy of digital services, there have been lots of different systems built up over time over the last many years. And with that, you have the challenge that they sit in different databases, that they have different data structures, they're not necessarily compliant or working well with new web services, and that you need to figure out a way to integrate that. You have other choice to say, well, I'll leave the legacy as is and touch it as little as possible and just build new stuff. But that potentially means that you miss out of a lot of opportunities where you have data that you can use. And some organizations even digitize data now. Have make records that they had on paper, digital available, and then could use that potentially to make the online experience a better experience. With that, ultimately everything needs to be consumed on some device. So we're talking about browsers, we're talking about apps, and with that, the usual user experience is that sometimes UI UX topics with information being selected and presented is confusing to people. We've sat through a number of interesting sessions with GDS testing out experiences for public sector services, where you get really different responses from the public in terms of being confused, I'm not quite sure if they should click this button or that button. Ultimately, if the person can't handle it, they will leave it. They will figure out another way. They'll pick up the phone or do something else. So from that perspective, I think data is a crucial part to understand how to use in a way that makes online services easy to use. That's, I think, one core area for it. And then for organizations to find out what can we learn from the use of the service to make the service overall better or introduce new services that are currently not existent in digital. With that, tools will evolve, systems will evolve. The amount of data is really growing significantly. That means that a lot of the legacy solution challenges have been, we can't handle it, it's too costly. That is not really an issue any longer. So storage is very cheap, processing is increasingly cheap, in-memory is increasingly cheap. That means you can do real-time stuff, you can bring a lot of data together, you can create web services that connect data. And that's basically where I think AWS as a platform is certainly going to evolve and will help organizations to have a foundation where they can apply their own innovation. It's impossible to build all of that stuff from scratch. If you have the aspiration, I think you're probably not realistic. From that perspective, in order to have innovation become reality, or ideas become reality very quickly, you need increasingly a quite substantial foundation to do that. It also helps that many of these tools are very easy to use for technical people. You don't need to have very, very specific technical skills. It's quite easy to learn. So that helps organizations to build in-house teams to use these AWS tools to a certain level, and then as needed, get additional expertise. So effectively build your future business in this digital space without the usual hurdles.
Just to add, I think in the public sector, there's two big trends that they're facing. One is the shift from on-premises computing to cloud computing. The second is really around how do we embrace sort of the digital world, but also comply with the consumer privacy, constituents' privacy standards around GDPR in a way that gives constituents more choice on how they want to be serviced or how they access content without diminishing quality. So what I mean by that is, for example, instead of relying on going to your doctors during regular business hours, you can get answers to your questions out, after 5 or before 9 o'clock, or on the weekends. I think by our ability to kind of rely on AWS to kind of take the heavy lifting infrastructure piece out of the equation in terms of availability, in terms of reliability, in terms of scalability, and then allow us to focus on building top-notch software as a solutions for a public sector constituent. We think we can deliver more agile, more cost-effective solutions for them. At the same time, give the public sector departments or greater choice in how they want to service their constituents in a more reliable, consistent way.
Wow. That's a super interesting space, guys. Well, gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate your time and sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you, Tim.
And thank you very much for joining us in this conversation with Teavaro.